I've known Father Mark since I was in probably junior high and high school. And back then in those days, Father Alex Chung, Sue King, who was also very instrumental in helping coordinate all the activities for us here today, especially during the following weeks, she was our youth minister. And Father Mark was our seminarian intern at the time. So those for us were our wonder years. Those were the years of joy and also of tremendous safety. The air that they created for us was one of safety, especially in the 90s in the city of Gardena. That was very kind of dangerous, right? And here we were, a bunch of Korean kids on youth group wandering around the streets of Gardena like there was no care in the world, right? And so when I heard the news that Father Mark had passed away, the feeling that was echoed to me made sense. The world felt a little bit less safe. You know, Father Mark had this incredible way of belief about himself, a strong man, very, very strong, right? But at the same time, he had a very soft spot. And his soft spot was people. He cared for people. Right? Father Mark was an incredible priest. And that's something that we should not downplay. He will be for us forever Father Mark, who presided at Eucharist for us week after week and day after day. Father Augustine referred to many moments when he would, right after Mass, Father Mark had a tremendous tolerance for pain, which was a blessing but also a curse. No one really knew exactly how he was feeling, and so often he would have lower back pains and things like that, and it would be painful for him, right? When we were younger, we used to call him like the Terminator because he would run and run and run and run and run. It was crazy. And even now with the seminarians, when he would try to take us to the gym, he would go really fast on the treadmill and at an incline of like 12. And he would just run like crazy. But he was Superman. Right? Nothing could defeat him, right? He was also very stubborn, right? So when you put together superhuman strength and stubbornness, it's a powerful combination, right? But in those days when we were upstairs, he would switch out of his shoes into some Birkenstocks. To this day, I still wear Birkenstocks, right? I think that was a tradition started by Father Alex, right? And so he would switch out of the clothes and into shoes, and he would go upstairs. And Father Augustine and I would follow in suit, like two ducks, And in those days, he would talk about his love for the church in difficult times, in many difficult ways, but also in many beautiful ones. He would ask us difficult questions about humanity, and he would challenge us, right? He was a man of deep principle, a principle that is unmatched by any priest that I've ever seen in the history of the world so far in my life. Right? He believed strongly in the Eucharist. He believed strongly in prayer. I've never met a man or a priest who believes so strongly in the sacraments of the church. Before St. Raphael was built, he would spend hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament. He would often tell people his weaknesses, right? Oh, I'm not very good at Korean. In fact, when he first gave his Korean homily at Maria Regina, I think there were like 4 words, right? And to see him grow in that capacity. Right? Now, me, since I don't speak Korean that well, he'd always end his Korean sentences with 갔다가. I was like, what is 갔다가? I never heard that. So when I was learning Korean, I was like, what does that mean? And I realized, it's a verbal tic, that he had. One of the many things. But he would spend hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And he admitted, what I can't do, I believe that the Lord will do. And he brought all of us to the Blessed Sacrament. He would spend hours here. He would pray as faithfully as he could the Liturgy of the Hours, no matter where we were. Whether we were on vacation or traveling, and he would pray. Now, I know many priests who don't, who have given up on the Liturgy of the Hours. But he was a man of principle. This was his commitment and promise to Holy Mother Church, that he would pray. And he said, what would you be if you were not a man of prayer? What use are you? He goes, you suck as a businessman. Yes, right? And he goes, you would suck at most other professions. Well, yes. He goes, why not thrive in the one thing that the church is asking you to do, which is prayer? And that always stuck with me. And it challenged me, even as I was growing as a seminarian here. He would have me expose the Blessed Sacrament, and I'm coming from, Camarillo and all these other places, and I'd sometimes be 10 minutes late, and he goes, why are you late? Very serious, right? And I try to play it off, like, oh, I was late because of traffic, it's Los Angeles, and he would be very serious. And he goes, why are you so casual? I'm like, I don't know. There's those moments where you just kind of freak out, right? I knew that Father Mark was mad. And he said, if you know Los Angeles, then you should do and have the responsibility to be on time. Right? He said, and he said, our Lord's been waiting for you in the tabernacle. He's on time. If you tell the Lord that you'll be there at 2 a.m., don't you think that he would show up? And I go, yes. And he goes, then why can't you? I go, most of the people here, when they pray, they want God to show up. They want God to be there for them when their parents are sick and when their family members are sick and so forth. He goes, the least we could do as priests is to show up on time for God. I never forgot that. He said, if I see that you are ordained, it's Father Mark, right? He goes, you will be on time. And I never forgot it. I always came a half an hour to an hour early for everything, because I knew that he was watching, right? He knew, right? He would say that you would know the measure and the character of a man when you watch him when he thinks nobody is looking. And also, one of Father Mark's sayings, is when a person's in a buffet line and they know there's not enough food, right? So these were his kind of judgments that he would make. But he was deeply principled, loved the Eucharist. He also loved Our Lady. I think it's so fortuitous that today is the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes. He loved Our Lady so much, which is probably instilled in him in the early days when he was a legionnaire of Christ. He just loved Our Lady. He would always have a rosary in his pocket, always, and he's constantly praying the rosary, right? And his hair, he would grow worrisome and sick because people would tell him all their problems, right? Oh, my spouse is beating me. Oh, we're poor. I can't afford to pay rent, or my kids need tuition money, or we don't have enough money for the internet, or this and that. And Father Mark, he gave everything that he had. I can't tell you, he would strangle me for letting you know. He paid for people's rent. So many people. And he never advertised a single moment. He paid for people's tuitions in school. He paid for their cell phone bills. He paid for their internet. He knew when families were hungry and starving, and he would give them food. But he wouldn't do it in an undignified way, because he knew the indignity of poverty. He would always say that. Right? I mean, when we were younger, we would play basketball, and afterwards he would all buy us Gatorade, right? And he was really rough. Right? Father Mark was a very strong man, so when he boxed you out, when you're 14 years old, you fly halfway across the court, right? So, but he would buy, all of us Gatorade, and we were, but he would tell us stories about growing up and how difficult it was, right? And how to appreciate these moments, and even simple moments like drinking Gatorade after playing basketball. He would talk about his love for the Lakers and listening to Chick Hearn, on the radio, listening to baseball games when they were on the radio. He loved sports, right? But in those moments that he heard people's problems, he always went to Our Lady. He was always shuffling in his hands a rosary beads. People didn't know this, but he rarely thought about himself. He would wear clothes until they literally would fall off, right? I mean, there was this one picture that's been kind of floating around of Father Mark. He's wearing like this kind of jersey type material that's like gray and blue. And he would wear that all the time. In fact, even when in 2016 he was getting his first neck surgery, he would still wear that jacket, but his pockets would have these holes in them because he would always pray the rosary. During Lent, he would fast for 40 to 50 days. And it's not a fast from chocolate or this and that, no. It was a Father Mark Choi style of fasting. So it was literally water, lemon juice, and maple syrup, right? Extreme fasts. Why? Because he believed in what our Lord was asking of him and also of us. That was also the first time that he taught me how to smoke a cigar. Because during these fasts, he would he kind of have these hunger pains, and he would be dizzy after celebrating 4 or 5 masses on a Sunday. And if you in Norwalk here during the sun, it's really hot, right? And so we would walk around the parking lot, praying a rosary and smoking a cigar. But this is the type of man that he was, extremely dedicated. He hated money, but he understood that other people saw its power. Right? He was never motivated by money. He saw it as kind of nothing. But he saw so many priests and so many people just kill themselves over this thing. That's not what he wanted. Right? He taught us that the most important thing is the integrity of a person's soul. That could never be negotiable for anybody and for anything. And he proved that. Father Mark loved the youth. He loved the youth so much that he literally gave his life, for all of us. Whether you knew him when he was just Mark, or when he was Father Mark, but he loved the youth. And as a priest, I think he was also very sadly misunderstood. In fact, I think the Korean people are often misunderstood by the church, right? He is faithful. And in that fidelity, what some people only saw was conservatism. But what they couldn't see beyond the categories of political systems was his love for the church and for the people that he served. And this may make Archbishop feel uncomfortable, but when he would celebrate Mass, Archbishop, he would invite all the youth around and surround the altar. Back in those days, you were an Archbishop, it was Cardinal Mahoney, so he'll take the blame. So, but he would have the youth just surround the altar, and we would have pictures of that where he would celebrate the Eucharist, surrounded. And he wanted us to have a love for the Blessed Sacrament. And he was a priest who also loved his children to know, also to let them go as well. He never chased after anybody, but he waited patiently until they came back. Whether you came back here from college or from otherwhere you would be, that he would always be here. But he knew, and if you were fortunate enough to be here, you knew that he loved you, without a doubt. There was one thing for me that was interesting. Being here is like kind of flood of memories. I mean, the last time I was actually here was my first Mass, right? Also, it was here that Father Mark made me sing the Exultet at Easter in Korean, which I completely destroyed. But he loved watching me fail. That was one of those things. But he loved creativity. He loved challenges. He was very vague with details because he wasn't a micromanager nor a task manager. But when he gave you instructions, he demanded excellence and he demanded the best. But he also demanded creativity, right? And so what he wanted from us was, if you're going to fail, fail fast, but learn. Right? He wanted to stretch us as seminarians and as priests, as ministers, never to take things for granted, but also just kind of follow along the same path. He's always be hungry for something that's good and better. Always strive for excellence. Always strive for holiness and for prayer. And never compromise yourself or your moral integrity for anybody. These were the lessons that I remember Father Mark so clearly instilling in us as seminarians and as priests, and especially in the youth. There were small things that most people didn't know about Father Mark. He loved plants. He loved watching things grow. That was like the mystery of life for him. And he also loved animals. You wouldn't think such a hard man at times would love animals, but he does. He had these two great dogs, Ralphie and Ella, and there's a soft spot that he has, but also that he also loved the Legion. He never spoke ill about the Legionaries of Christ. He loved his time with the Legion, and it was his formative years. But I remember he would give us snippets of his life in the Legionaries of Christ, right? He was, most people don't know, but he was the lead seminarian in charge of altar servers for the Legion when they were serving under Pope John Paul II. And every Christmas Eve Mass, that Pope John Paul II would have the legionaries serve that Mass. And so Father Mark was always with the Holy Father at that Mass. And he would tell us a story about one Christmas Eve that he was helping Pope John Paul II vest. And the Holy Father used to always vest behind the Pietà. So during one of those moments, the Holy Father looked out at the crowd and he asked him, he said, Mark, but he wasn't Father Mark then, right? He goes, Mark, why do you think they're here? Why do you think they're here? And all these people. And Father Mark just said, for you, Holy Father. Right? And John Paul II asked him this question, is that what you think? And then he just said, Christ, Christ, Christ. I think that's where Father Mark, when he would give his homilies, he would always ask us a question that was usually awkward and difficult, and he would say, I don't think so. Even today's responsorial psalm, right? He would have laughed, because, the Lord is my shepherd, there's nothing I shall want, right? He would go, really? Nothing that you want? Really? He would just laugh, and when he would laugh a lot, like his asthma would kick up, and he would cough like crazy, but then he would go back to what he's saying. But this is a man who loved his people. He was strict when he had to be. He was stubborn when he had to be. But without question, he loved the church. He believed in the sacraments, and he loved his people, most especially the youth. And so I would just like to end by just making this appeal at this moment to anybody who was able to be here in youth group or whatever. And I understand that you're all in different areas of your life. It would behoove us to reconsider, if you've been away from the church, to have your heart open enough to believe again and to come back to Mass. If not here, then somewhere else. Father Mark gave his life for the sacraments and for us because he believed in something that was deeper than circumstance. So I just ask anyone who was able to be there, if you find yourself away from the church, to consider coming back to Mass and the sacraments. If we want to honor Father Mark, I think there's no better way than for a priest to see his children come back to the Lord. Right? So if we can, I think that would be a good thing for all of us. And so I thank you for listening, and also I thank you, Archbishop, for your patience and for your care for the family, for Father Raymond for helping to organize this, and for John. I've met you just a few times, but know that our prayers are with you. especially during this incredible time. And if there's anything you need, then I think you could reach out to about 40 of us, right? So, thank you.
다음으로는 가족 대표 신부님의 동생분인 존 초이 나오셔서 어머님에 대한 조사 있으시겠습니다. Our final remark will be given by John Choi, brother of Father Mark Choi.
Hi, most of you probably don't know my mother since this is a parish from my brother, but let me tell you a little bit about her. My mother, Elizabeth Subang Che, was born the eldest of 6 children in 1934. She lived through the Japanese occupation of our country, where she was forced to speak only Japanese in school or be punished for it. She often broke this rule just to spite the occupiers, which shows her stubborn streak. And I think people have talked about Father Mark's stubborn streak. And his last name is Choi, and in Korea, it's well known, the Cheshi, 고집 세다 그러는 말이 있습니다. So it's known that the Choi family are stubborn, but I personally think, as an aside, that it comes from my mom. In any case, the occupation ended in 1945 when she was only 11 years old. But shortly after this, she faced more trauma because of 6.25, or the breaking out of the Korean War. And this trauma lasted for 3 years, from 1950 to 53. This profoundly impacted her and subsequently us as a family, because that was the impetus for her decision to move to her 3 sons and her husband to the United States, because she was afraid of yet another war breaking out in Korea. She loved books and writing, but she had a pretty chauvinistic father. So she, who believed women did not need higher education. So she had to fight really tooth and nail for her to be college educated. Her love of writing continued even after she moved to the US with her husband and 3 sons. As an immigrant in the 1970s, and especially one who spoke no English, she had to work multiple low-paying jobs, along with my father, just to stay afloat financially. However, no matter how financially difficult it became, she insisted that all her sons go to private Catholic school. So her spirituality, her love of books, and respect for the power of education transferred to her sons, including myself and Father Mark, which was probably the key factor for keeping us out of trouble. Even with all the difficulties she faced in life, or perhaps because of them, she found time to write and create poetry. She finally realized her dream of becoming a published poet later in her life when she entered Korea's, it's called Shinchun Munye, or New Spring Authors Associations, was an international writing contest. Among the thousands of entrants, she won first place and finally realized and was able to publish her works. And I think Father Augustine actually read you one of her poems. Father Mark was extremely proud of his mother's accomplishments and took after her penchant for prose. If you look at the back of the program here, today's program in the back, there is a short poem and prayer that Father Mark wrote during his ordination mass in 1994. So if you read it, it's in context to him becoming a priest and thanking God for that gift that it was bestowed on him to become a priest. He said, "My loving God, into my lowly hands you have laid the mystery of mysteries of this great gift. Humbly I can only offer my love,